How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to replace the front brake rotors on a Mazda CX-5. Now, this is assuming that you don't need to replace your brake pads. For me personally, I didn't have to replace the brake pads because I just done that. I was still having a little bit of a sort of like vibration and warble under braking. I thought that the brake rotors, I could get away with keeping them, but in the end they were a little bit warped, so I decided to replace them today, having already done the brake pads just a few weeks ago. If you don't know how to replace your brake pads, or you're looking for a complete, brake job, I do have a video here on how to do the brake pads both on the front and on the rear. So I'll post both those different videos up here, and that will help you figure that out. But for today's purposes, we're just gonna be replacing the rotor. Now, before we get into the procedure, I wanna show you exactly which tools you're gonna need, just to give you sort of a kind of shopping list or a way to sort of organize yourself before you start working on your car. So in order of appearance in the job, let me give you all the tools you're gonna need, and then I'll show you exactly how to get this done. So obviously the first thing you need is a jack, floor jack, and some jack stands, as well as some wheel chocks, something to lift the car, okay? You can use the one that's included with your car. I don't love using, those included little twist jacks, but they work. A floor jack is obviously better. Next, we gotta remove our lug nuts. The CX-5 uses a 21 millimeter lug nut, so we're gonna need a 21 millimeter socket in order to get that off. And then obviously to go along with that, you'll want something like a breaker bar in order to break those loose. For the slide pins, you're gonna need a 14 millimeter. I got a socket here, but something like an open end or box end wrench would also be pretty useful. These are on pretty tight and you're working in sort of tight quarters, so you're gonna want something that you can get some leverage behind. So either, again, a socket with some sort of kind of longer handled ratchet, or if you have a wrench like this, you can sort of tap it with a mallet or use your fist if you need to get a little bit more leverage, because everything's kind of tight back there. Once we get the slide pins off, we have to remove the bracket, and that requires a 17 millimeter. And again, I just used a socket here with a long handled ratchet, such as this one. This one is extendable. The bracket bolts are gonna be, well, first of all, they're gonna have red Loctite on there, and they're gonna be on at about 75 foot-pounds. So they're gonna be on there pretty dang tight. So you're gonna need something with some leverage, and you're gonna have to put a little bit of force into them. Now, the rotor can be on there pretty tight. They sort of get, not fused, but they sort of lock onto the hub a little bit when they're on there for many thousands of miles. And so you might need a little bit of persuasion to get it off. So a rubber mallet will do the trick, just something just to tap it. It doesn't really take all that much, but just something to kind of loosen it off in case it's been sort of like rusted onto there. Then in terms of prep, before we put everything back together, the first thing you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna push the piston back into the caliper. So because you're gonna be putting on a thicker rotor, there's a good chance that the pads are gonna be too close together to actually fit on there. And so you're gonna wanna retract the piston to essentially retract the pads. And so you're gonna want a disc piston spreader, such as this one. And then I like to keep at least one old brake pad laying around for use with this thing here, just so I can kind of torque it back down without, risking damaging a good brake pad. Not necessary, but recommended. You'll probably have a little bit of rust on the hub where it interfaces with the rotor. And so if you have something like a wire wheel, drill attachment, or even just like a wire brush, something to clean it off, it's gonna make it less likely to have any sort of vibration or unevenness. So that's something that can be useful, but not necessary. Before we put everything back together, you're definitely gonna want some brake cleaner. So get a bottle of this in order to clean off the new rotor and clean everything off before you put it all back together. You're gonna want some brake parts lubricant in order to re-grease the slide pins, just kind of good practice to do that when you have everything apart. And then you're gonna want a little bit of red Loctite to put on those bracket bolts before you put everything back together. It had red Loctite when you took them off, so usually when you take something off with Loctite, you wanna put some Loctite back on. The blue Loctite will work in a pinch. I mean, it's better than nothing, but for something like brakes, you wanna be safe. So get the red stuff, it's the high strength stuff. A tube of this is, $5-6 on Amazon or $8-9 at Napa, so just pick it up if you're gonna do this job. And then finally, to put everything back together, we're gonna need a torque wrench. Now, I've got two here. This one is a bigger one that goes up to 150 foot-pounds, and this one only goes up to 80. I like this one because it has a very narrow head, so it's good for getting into tight spaces. So when you're doing the slide pin bolts and the caliper bracket bolts, this works really well. And then the big one here is just what I use for the lug nuts because it has quite a bit of leverage. And then finally, you're also probably going to need some shop towels such as these just to clean off the new rotor because it is going to have some manufacturing grease on there and we definitely don't want any of that to make contact with our brake pads. Okay, so that's everything we need to get this job done. A shop will charge you, I don't know, a brake job usually like $500. That's a waste of money. You can do this on your own with a few hours. I mean, I was filming and I did this in about an hour and a half, including filming. This is really not a difficult job. Follow the guide, it'll get you through it. I promise you it's gonna save you money. You're gonna learn how to work on your car. You're gonna feel fulfilled. So let's go ahead and show you exactly how this process is done. We're gonna go outside, jack the car up, and then replace the rotors on the front here. On the rear, it's gonna be a very similar process. I didn't do the rear today. I'll probably make a video in the future doing the rear as well, but the only difference is that you're gonna have to essentially retract the piston using a different tool, the caliper piston. And again, if you watch my video here on how to replace the brake pads on the rear, it will show you exactly how to do that. So if you wanna use this for the rear, this will work for you, okay? Just you have to do a slightly different process. And then obviously you're gonna have to undo the park brake because that's gonna keep everything locked together. So make sure to undo that if you're doing the rear. Okay, with all that being said, let's go outside and get this job done. Thank you guys for watching so far. If this video is helpful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I would greatly appreciate that. Let's go do this brake job. All right, the first thing we're gonna do here is we're just gonna crack those lug nuts loose using our 21mm socket and a breaker bar. We're gonna do this with the car still on the ground just to make our lives a little bit easier, and then we can go ahead and jack it up using our floor jack on the cross member here. And then we can go ahead and raise the car. With the car off the ground, we're gonna go ahead and chalk off the rear wheels and then place our jacks under the pinch welds and then lower the car onto the jacks. Give it a good shake before you get under the car just to make sure that you're safe. Now we can go ahead and remove the lug nuts the rest of the way, again using our 21mm socket. And once we have the wheel fully loosened, I like to place it under the car just to have an extra layer of safety in case something were to happen. All right, back to the hub here, we're gonna remove the caliper slide pins. There's two of them. They have 14mm heads on them, one at the top, one at the bottom. And so using either a wrench or a ratchet with a socket, go ahead and loosen those up. They're gonna be on there pretty tight, so I just kind of use my hand to kind of hit it down, and then you can zip them off with a ratchet. With those bolts removed, we can go ahead and lift the caliper out of the way, and it's always a good idea to hang it off of the strut or something so it's not hanging by the brake line, just to make sure that doesn't get stretched out or damaged. And then we can go ahead and remove the bracket bolts that hold everything together. There's one at the top, one at the bottom. These are 17mm, and they're gonna be on there about 75 foot-pounds, so you're gonna need quite a little bit of leverage, so a long ratchet or a long wrench is your friend here. Once you have those removed, you can go ahead and just remove the bracket and set it to the side. And then the rotor might be on there a little bit, so use a mallet just to tap it off, and then you can pull the old rotor off. Now you're gonna wanna clean off the hub here just where it mates to the rotor just to make sure you avoid any chance for any sort of misalignment or potential vibrations. So wire wheel, and then some brake cleaner, and then maybe a little more wire wheel, and maybe even a wire brush. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you wanna get it as smooth as possible and just get the high spots off at the very least. Make sure to get this nice and clean, and then we can go ahead and turn our attention to our new brake rotor. Now, the new brake rotor is going to have some manufacturing grease or oil on there, which is definitely not what you want touching your brake pads. So our first order of business here is to go ahead and completely clean the new rotor with some brake spray and a clean, ideally lint-free paper towel. So go ahead and spray your brake cleaner all over the rotor. Use your paper towel. As you can see here, it's going to be pretty dirty, so you want to go and do this quite a few times until the paper towel is nearly clean. Now, you may leave some lint on the brake rotor. That's okay. It's going to burn off when you start driving. Don't worry about that, but make sure you get all the oil off. Once the rotor is nice and clean, we can go ahead and compress the piston back into the caliper using our disc pad spreader. You're going to want to use, obviously, the tool, and then it's a good idea to use an old brake pad. I keep a box around just to make sure I have some on hand to push the piston back into the caliper. Now it's time to install our new rotor, so go ahead and slide that onto the studs here, and then you can go ahead and replace your bracket here, which usually will take the brake pads with it, which makes it a little bit easier. Let's go ahead and slide that back on. And then I just put in one of the bolts first, and then once that's on there, I go ahead and take the other bolt, put my red Loctite on there, go ahead and install that, and then I loosen the first one and put Loctite on there, and then put that on. These get torqued down to 75 foot-pounds, so quite a little bit of force here. So just make sure that you have a good angle, and then you're gonna just go ahead and get these as tight as you can, and then torque them down to 75. And then since we have everything apart, it's a good idea to remove your slide pins, give them a little cleaning, and then put some fresh brake parts lubricant on there. So just a little bit, and then spread it around with your fingers and reinstall them. Do this for both the top and the bottom slide pin. This will just make sure that your brakes are running nice and quietly. Now we can go ahead and place our caliper back onto the brake pads over here, onto the bracket, get that positioned, and then you're just going to tighten down those two bolts, and those get tightened down to 24 foot-pounds. All right, now give everything one more cleaning with brake cleaner, just because you may have gotten some of the oils from your fingers on there. And then you can go ahead and replace your wheel, put that onto the hub, put on your lug nuts, and get those tightened down in a star or crisscross pattern. Go ahead and raise your car off of the jack stands. You can then remove your jack stands from under the car and place the car back onto the ground. And then with the car on the ground, you can torque the lug nuts down to 80 to 108 foot-pounds, and you're all done. Hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.